Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Kiloby Center for Recovery, and I'm really happy to be here with Dr. Gail Parker, a fellow yoga and meditation teacher. I'm so impressed with your book about restorative yoga, and that's one of the ways you came to my attention. And also, I've been following you for the last couple of years. So, I would just like to get a little bit of an introduction here. You're a therapist as well as a yoga teacher. And can you just kind of fill us in a little bit on how you got to this point where you've written this wonderful book and you're doing this work, and how did you kind of arrive here? It's a big
Well,
question.
it was a long journey, as you might imagine. Shall I start at the
Mhm.
beginning?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
Wherever you like to start.
All right. So I'm a psychologist by training and by profession, and I have been studying and practicing yoga for 50 years. The way I came to my yoga practice was it found me, I think. I found a place that was where yoga was being taught. I was in Detroit at the time, at the Detroit Institute of Arts. I do
Mhm.
not know how I found this place because in those days there were no such thing as yoga studios.
Right? Yeah.
They didn't exist, and I stumbled upon this class, and out of curiosity, that's what I would have called it. I went,
Mm.
and I really, 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 really loved it. I just was so attracted to the practice. It was a very gentle practice, infused with a lot of philosophical teachings. And I went once a week because it was only offered weekly for a year. We were given Autobiography of a Yogi to read, which kind of went over my head at the time. I was 22 years old, I think, 21 or 22 years old. I read it, but it had as much meaning to me as it can have to a 21-year-old, and so with not a lot of lived experience.
Right.
But I continued the practice. I kept. We didn't even have audio tapes or videotapes then, so you could find a book, look at the picture, do the practice, or
Mhm.
just remember what was being taught in the class. And I did that for years, and I never really fully understood what kept me so engaged because basically I learned a home practice first, which
Mm.
is typically what people say you evolve into.
Right.
But that's where I started. And so I would tell the story to people about this yoga class, and I would explain to them that it was taught by a man named Mr. Black, and Mr. Black wore a black suit and tie, which he did to teach us yoga. And
Yoga.
we
That's
took
interesting.
yoga in our t-shirts and jeans, no
Mhm.
yoga mats, no nothing.
Yeah.
So when I would tell this story, especially to young people today who don't know about that kind of yoga, there would always be this astonished look like, really? So I started thinking maybe it was kind of a preposterous claim. I thought it was a long time ago. Maybe I made it up. But I liked the story, so I kept telling it.
Uh-huh.
And one day, about, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, someone ran up to me and said, "Was his name Yogacharya, Mr. Black?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "I think I know him." So I thought, oh, I was so happy I had not made this up.
Yeah.
And shortly after that, someone posted on Facebook about a wonderful retreat center they had attended in Vanderbilt, Michigan, a Song of the Morning Retreat Center. So I clicked on the link and it said, Song of the Morning Retreat Center was founded by Oliver Black. Mr. Black used to teach yoga at the Detroit Institute of Arts.
So it was
So
the
I
same.
clicked on that link, and there he was in his black suit and tie. I was so excited and so happy to realize this really had occurred. But it was the first time that it occurred to me, because I didn't know this, that I had been introduced to the practice by a master. He, as it turns out, was one of the disciples, a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda.
Oh.
And so, as you know, when these traditions are passed on from these masters, it has an impact that you don't even realize it's having. And
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure that that's what kept me engaged and always going deeper and always going deeper into the practice. I decided to take yoga teacher training, like many of us do, to
Mhm.
learn more about the practice of it. So now I'm practicing in studios, which began to proliferate in the 1990s, I think. And I was so happy because I really enjoyed the practice and being able to share it with people and being instructed. It was great.
Mhm.
And so I took yoga teacher training, not to teach yoga, I said, as we all do, but to learn more about it.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to restorative yoga. And
Uh,
this was over 20 years ago. I was introduced to restorative yoga that's taught in a traditional kind of way where we use bolsters and props to hold the body in postures uh, so that you can remain still as you do a deep inner exploration.
right.
And it occurred to me then, I thought, this is amazing. As a psychologist, I thought, you know what?
Mm,
This is a way in for people to realize that they actually do have an inner life because everyone doesn't know that. Everyone doesn't know that the thoughts I'm thinking and the feelings I'm having and the way I'm behaving have to do with what's going on inside of me.
mhm,
And you can try to teach people that,
mhm,
but if they can have a direct experience of that,
right.
it's very powerful. And
Mhm,
so that's when I began to integrate what I was learning into my practice as a psychologist. I
wow.
didn't teach my clients I didn't teach them yoga. I didn't teach them postural yoga.
Mhm,
I used the philosophy. I used my awareness of what I understood was possible
right,
to support them in cultivating and developing a deeper awareness of their inner life and an awareness that you may not be able to control what's going on around you, but you can control what's going on within you regardless of what's going on around you.
right.
And when you have the actually have the experience, which I have had, where again, it's easy to say the words, but when you've actually experienced that moment when it doesn't matter what's going on around you, you are just somewhere.
Yeah.
It's very powerful. So that's really how I began to integrate gradually over time
Mhm,
the what I understood about yoga. So mostly it was through my own practice, my
mhm,
own experience of the practice that I was able to share what I understood within the context of psychotherapy because people are not coming to psychotherapy to learn about yoga.
right,
They're
right.
coming to psychotherapy to solve a problem.
Mhm,
But what many people, as I said before, don't understand is the problem is not out there.
mhm, right.
Or what, I'm not going to say that. The problem sometimes is out there. The solution to the problem is not always out there.
Yeah.
The
Mhm,
solution can come from within.
mhm,
And it is that awareness of the within in what I regarded and learned and teach in a fairly gentle way. Don't be afraid to go within. Don't be afraid to um, discover what you hold inside of yourself. And when you bump into those parts of yourself that are unpleasant, that you don't like,
mhm.
that are disturbing, instead of popping out, stay in there and go even deeper. It's
Yeah.
learning that if I can go through these blocks that
Mhm,
I've built up, that are built up within me that I didn't even know about,
right.
if I can encounter those and go through them and get to the other side, oh, oh, that's where my what freedom is, I guess. Yeah, or
Mm.
sense of well-being. It's that. So.
And the way that yoga is structured is, not just the yoga poses, but the philosophy of yoga and the psychology
Mhm.
of meditation. Wonderful container, and it's such a good way in. So all around us, though, often what we see in the yoga world is more emphasis on asana, Some
Mhm.
just the postures, maybe the postures with a bit of breath work. So you must have been feeling like you weren't quite in sync with the kind of popularizing of yoga, the spandex, the or what was your experience with that?
Well, my experience of that was, as I said, I really enjoyed, doing the athletic forms of yoga that were being taught and are being taught.
Mhm.
But I had already internalized. I
Ah,
had a different internal experience of yoga, so I was bringing to the, physical practice deep levels of awareness, and what I began to notice as I was doing these practices, I began to learn more about me. For example, I remember one time because I tended to be, I guess I'm a recovering type A.
mhm,
So I'm doing, which by the way, I talked about some of this in my book. You know, when you are somebody who is always doing more,
mhm,
always working really, really hard, and that's in you. When you're in a yoga class, for example, a strenuous yoga class, and the instruction is to give it even more, you do. So
right,
you do.
yeah,
You go to your edge. So,
yeah,
and what the teacher doesn't know is you're already over your edge. So, but you're willing to take it one step further.
right,
And so I, of course, would get injured. And I remember, well, I'll never forget this. I was in my office one night and uh, I must have torn some hamstring
mhm,
uh, connectors, I was in such pain. And I remember saying I said it out loud. I said, when is it going to stop hurting? And I heard myself say it. And I thought, if one of my clients said that to me, I would say, when you stop doing whatever it is that's causing you to hurt.
right,
So that's how I practiced yoga.
mm, mhm,
I was always listening to the inner voice as I was doing these external uh, activities. And I started writing a blog called Taking Yoga Off Your Mat because I also thought that I could have written, I guess, taking therapy off the couch,
mhm,
which I played with that title. My son said, Mother, it's boring. Do not do that. I said, okay. So we did Taking Yoga Off the Mat because
right,
it doesn't matter what you're doing if all you're doing is um, doing this stuff on the mat or on the couch,
mhm,
what good is that?
yeah, it's not really
Now,
integrated,
no, now what am I going to do? I think Krishnamacharya says that. It's not what you're doing on the mat that matters. It's what you do when you get off the mat, how you're living your life, how
mhm,
you're applying what you learn about yourself.
right,
So for me, yoga, the practice of self-study, svadhyaya, is what yoga is. It's what
right,
yoga has always been for me. And it's what I
mhm,
teach. So self-study can occur in lots of forms. Yoga is one of them.
right,
And and so that I mean that was really what was important to me. And I never lost that. I came to the practice with that desire to learn about myself. And so
right,
I teach it that way.
and you would be modeling that for your students. One
Mhm.
thing I noticed early on was that, we talk about ahimsa as being the first principle in yoga,
Mhm.
which is non-harming. But if
Mhm.
we're not aware of ourselves, if we're not in our bodies, which most people aren't, then we don't know whether it's harmful or not. So
Mhm.
the practice of yoga is so wonderful about actually bringing people into their bodies and starting to cultivate that self-awareness and possibility of kindness towards
Mhm.
ourselves. And so
Mhm.
to be teaching it that way and for people, whether they come to it through kind of a vigorous asana practice or something else, the structure of yoga lends itself to reveal who we are. And I think most teachers have that kind of approach on some level. There's something really compelling about the whole self-study and the getting to know ourselves and being kind.
there's something very compelling about that until you bump into the parts of yourself that contradict the image that you have of yourself as a loving, kind, compassionate person. Because we
Mhm.
all think of ourselves that way. We all think we're really good people.
Right. Mhm.
And when we get feedback that either by going within and some memory pops up or some awareness greets us
Mhm.
that is shameful or that we feel guilty about or that is agitating or of an emotion that we don't think we should have,
Mhm.
anger. And so typically what people are inclined to do, particularly in the American culture, United States, is to, and in the yoga world in particular, is to deny that.
Mhm.
I want that to, that's, I don't want to know that. I don't want to be disturbed. Yoga is a disturbing practice. It is transformative. It is
Mhm.
not just about relaxation. It is not. It's not just about exercise. It is a transformative practice.
Right.
And if you are doing a regular yoga practice, I think it prepares you, hopefully, if you're not already prepared to be transformed, it prepares you and then you start experiencing the transformation and it's not always pleasant.
Right.
So one of the how do I want to say it? One of the things that I find limiting about some of the ways that trauma informed yoga is taught, for example, is there's a lot of emphasis on don't disturb, don't trigger anybody.
Mhm.
Well, obviously you're not going in there for the purpose of upsetting someone,
Right.
but if you are really if you understand the practice, it's going to be upsetting.
Right.
It disturbs, it's disturbing. It
Right.
shakes things up.
Mhm.
That's the process of transformation. So one of the things, one of the, as I said, limitations, I think, is that when you don't know how to manage when someone gets triggered, for example, then you try really hard not to do anything that might upset somebody.
Right.
And you're also in denial about all the ways that you're upsetting somebody so that when
Mhm.
they get upset, and so I would really like to see us be more, learn how to manage when
Mhm.
someone is upset. So people will ask me, well, what happens if I trigger someone? What should I do? The yoga teacher. And I remind people yoga is a breath practice. It doesn't make any difference what form of yoga you are practicing. If you can breathe, you're doing yoga.
Mhm.
When someone is upset, all you have to remember is to take them to the breath
Right. Yeah.
and breathe with them.
Mhm.
And you don't have to do anything else. You are a yoga teacher, you are a yoga therapist. Use the tool, the breath that we have as our
Mhm.
tool. The problem is the yoga teacher's triggered because the student got triggered, and the
Yeah.
yoga teacher forgets because they got triggered and pulled out of themselves
Yeah.
that
Mhm.
all I ever have to do, I don't have to shut this down. I don't have to keep that person from being triggered.
Right.
I have to remind all of us, let's go to the breath. Now, when the yoga teacher has done something that is offensive to students in the class, and the
Mhm.
students speak up and call the teacher out or call attention to the fact that, what you just said and did is not cool.
Right.
How does the yoga teacher remain present and centered to
Mhm.
receive that feedback? Do I
Right.
get defensive, which is a contraction?
Mhm.
I'm now in contraction. Or
Mhm.
can I stay open and receive what's coming in, even though I don't like it, even though I want to argue with the person, even though I want to change the subject, which
Mhm.
is how you know you've gotten triggered, by the way.
Right, right. Yeah.
When you're not able to just receive it and say thank you for the feedback. Um, I think this is the. I think we need more of that. I would like to see more of that, where you
Mhm.
can where yoga teachers can learn um, to manage themselves when they get triggered.
Well, and as you're talking about both of those things of
Mhm,
when a student is triggered or when a teacher is triggered, the foundation of both of those is the equanimity and the groundedness of the
mhm,
teacher. All the student really ever needs is that calm presence of someone who's there with them. Like you said, to help
mhm.
go back to the breath.
Yeah,
And if the teacher can't, I guess it points to the importance of doing our own work and really
that's
letting yoga transform us.
exactly. And that's why, in terms of so I'll bring us up to date in terms of this book that I have written called
Right.
Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. It occurred to me several years ago. It's been in me all my life, but when Trayvon Martin was murdered,
Mm,
and
mhm,
then when there were the string of murders that were occurring, and how painful all of that was to particularly Black people,
mm,
and how none of that was ever being addressed in predominantly white yoga spaces.
right.
I realized, I thought, you know what, these are practices that we should all be able to benefit from.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if you are living in a culture that requires so much of you just to even show up.
Mhm,
All
mhm.
of us learn, almost every Black person in the United States of America learns, and this could be worldwide, I don't know. In order to get half as far, you've got to be twice as good.
Right.
We all learn that. Our grandmothers teach us, our parents, you got to be 200% better to be equal. So
Yeah.
that's in us. So we show up, as I said, at 200% better. We don't
Mhm.
even know that that's what we're doing. This is what we do. Here we are. So to say do more, okay, now now I'm at 300.
Mm,
Um, but so yoga is a microcosm of the macrocosm, and
mhm.
so there are racial injuries occur within the yoga world.
Right.
However, we have a codified system in yoga
Mhm.
that teaches us how we're supposed to behave.
Mhm.
Do no harm, ahimsa. Tell
Right,
the truth.
right,
Try to find balance in your life. Don't hold on too tight. Don't
right.
steal.
Yeah,
Be clean.
yeah,
Self study.
yeah.
Be disciplined.
Mhm,
Surrender. These are all, so it's all there. And I think it's such a beautiful teaching, the yamas and niyamas. And these are principles that are, these are just universal principles, really. All the wisdom traditions are teaching. This just happens to be the form it's taking in yoga. And so it occurred to me that, you know what, I think yoga is a perfect container for bringing up the topic of race, which
mhm,
was a word that we weren't even saying until
mhm.
George Floyd's murder. And now all of a sudden we're seeing this awakening to the fact that, oh yeah, this stuff really is happening. It's really bad.
Yeah,
See, this
yeah,
is new. This is a new awareness for people who are not having that experience.
right. Yeah.
Okay. So when I started doing this work, it was people were still in denial. People were still, meaning white people were still being defensive and in denial. and argumentative about all of this, which is and sort of oblivious, and that's rewounding.
Yes, absolutely.
That
Mhm.
is rewounding.
Yeah.
But if you can't even have the conversation, which you couldn't, nothing changes. So it occurred to me that in addition to the pain and suffering that Black people and Indigenous people and other people of color are experiencing, being not the dominant racial group, it also occurred to me that, and the fact that the dominant group, white people in this case, can't even have the conversation
Right.
without getting defensive, without crying, without changing the subject, without trying to fix it, without trying to make it all better, telling you that that's not really the experience you're having. It occurred
Right.
to me that is a sign of their unhealed race based stress and trauma.
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
So typically in the United States, white people have typically, and probably still to a large extent, when you hear race, think of not them, not me.
Right. Yeah.
But I say, it's all of us.
Right.
It's all of us. So I was invited to make a presentation. I was teaching on faculty in medical schools and in a hospital, teaching yoga therapy
Mhm.
to people who wanted to learn how to use yoga as a therapeutic intervention. And the International Association of Yoga Therapists
Mhm.
got wind of what I was doing and invited me to come and make a presentation. Now, this is a 95% white organization.
It is, yeah.
So
Mhm.
I was a member. I was nervous about it. I was reluctant. But they
Mhm.
said, "No, no, 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 come do it, come do it." So I did. I wrote a proposal. I went, I made a short presentation. It was so well received that they called me back to come and keynote and offer a workshop the next year. You don't have to write a proposal. We want you to come and do this. So I did.
Mhm.
And I called the presentation because of the demographic. And the executive director and I talked about this at length. I called it White as a Color Too.
Mhm.
And I talked about how important it is for all of us to realize, and this is how I'm teaching it now, that we are every character in the story. This is not about someone else.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
If you can find it in your imagination or your willingness to just imagine what it would be like, not even to be, you don't even have to imagine what it's like to be the Black person. For example, during George Floyd's murder, I don't know how many white people looked at that and thought to themselves, the man who's killed, the murderer, could be my husband, could be my uncle, could be
Mhm.
my child,
Right.
could be my neighbor. Oh my God, what would that be like?
Mhm.
I I I suspect that very few people did that. I suspect that they saw the Black man being murdered and were appalled, and, "Oh my God," "Oh my God," and poor Black people. I would imagine that that was probably one of the impulses.
One of the
So I
yeah.
just invite everybody to, you know what? Let's go inside. Here's the yoga.
Okay.
Let's go within and begin to pay attention to my own relationship to my own race and my own ethnicity. How has that shaped me? How has that formed me? How do I show up in the world in this way? The practical, so anyway, so I gave this presentation, White is a Color Too. They
Mhm.
loved it. It was great. It was really good. It was one of the best ones I've ever done. It was really, I have to say,
Mhm.
it was good. And I ended it with a great story that everybody was, I mean, they were so stunned by the ending because it was funny. I got this spontaneous standing ovation. It was fun.
Oh,
Well, a
yeah.
publisher approached me and said, "I was at your talk. You need to write a book." And I said, "A book?" I said, "It's a 20-minute talk." She said, she laughed. She said, "You just think about it." So I did.
Yeah.
I wrote the proposal. I wrote the book.
Mhm.
The book was supposed it's called Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. It was supposed to be published June 2021. I
Mhm.
got it finished early because I didn't feel I thought, "You know what? Let me just get this done." And I did. I just dove in, and I submitted it to the publisher in October, a year ago. And they said, "You know what? Since you got this in early, we'll publish in June 2020." Great. Then when COVID hit,
Mhm.
they said we canceled everything,
Mhm.
including the publication date of the book.
Oh.
So I was thinking, this is like in March, February or March. So I'm thinking to myself, I thought, well, with this viral epidemic, my little book is just sort of not gonna. No
Yeah.
one's gonna, it's just not gonna be relevant, and it's not. I thought, but that's okay because I was fine. I said, well, I wrote the book. It was nice. It's
Yeah.
there. Um, and then we began to see after George, particularly after I think Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd, those
Mhm.
murders.
Yeah.
There was this, well, I call it a global awakening
Mhm.
in the midst of this viral pandemic to the
Yeah.
pandemic of racial injustice and violence. And I think it's because everybody was at home. I think it's
Um,
because everybody wasn't out doing all the things that we do that made it impossible to ignore this and to ignore how you feel about it, to ignore the impact it had. I think I'm pretty sure that that's what happened. We're being still, and bam, on top of everything else, this too. And so, so I didn't, I mean, so as it turns out, this book was delivered just at a time when it was evidently really, really needed because it's doing very well. It's doing
oh,
very
good.
well. And
It's a beautiful book.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. I
Mhm.
tried to write it so that it would so that it would apply to each of us. It's like we all have work to do in this area.
We do. Yeah.
We just do. I mean, this is a reckoning. It's time for us to wake up
Mhm.
to the damaging effects of racism and xenophobia, which, by the way, historically um, tend to be more to proliferate during infectious pandemics. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah.
What's your
Yep.
sense of why that is?
I think it's because well, people get scared.
Mm. Fear's a big
They
one.
get scared. And so, for example, we know that Asians are being scapegoated and stereotyped
Right.
because of the so-called China virus. Even that language is racist. It just is. The China virus. What is that? The Asian flu. I mean, if you start thinking about all of these words that we use, and you begin to recognize, wait a minute, that it's such an interesting. It's not even interesting. It's just, again, it's shaming. It's othering.
It's othering. Yeah.
It's othering and demonizing the other.
Mhm.
So it's fear. People become afraid and they start blaming somebody for something.
Mhm.
And so, on top of what already existed,
Mm.
people retreat even further into their corners.
Right.
And to the extent that you have not examined your own issues around your hangups around race and ethnicity, which I dare say many people have not,
Right. Yeah.
you just begin to act out more.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so what I'm saying, or if you don't act out, you go into denial. You go into your, well, that not me. I would never do something like that.
Right. Mhm.
Your defense
I'm
mode.
a nice person.
I'm a nice person. I would, oh my God, I am so appalled by this. Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Which is a very different experience than, oh my God, that could be me. That could be, as I said before, my husband, my
Right.
son, oh, wow, wow.
Mhm.
And so these practices that we do, I think support a compassionate response. But first you have to deal with your own stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So how does that work in a restorative yoga class? So people are doing these long holds supported so that
Mhm.
the body can really release. So we can
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
one thing that I always felt a little bit I love to do long shavasanas at the end of a class.
Mhm.
And some people are just like, "Yeah, yeah, let's get that over with." I
Yeah, I
just
don't
wanna
have time for that.
you know,
Right.
I don't have
Mhm.
time for this, right? And yet people are so stressed
Mhm.
that to be able to go into a class where, a regular class with asana and a long shavasana or a restorative class even more. So how does that work for people in terms of the transformation? Are you teaching or is like are you mentioning things or philosophy or psychology? Or is it you just put people in you just help people into the poses and then it happens from there? Like what would people expect in one of your restorative
In one
classes?
of my restorative classes?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I regard, let's see, how do I want to say this? I practice restorative yoga.
Mhm.
So it's in me. So I know what it
Right.
does. And the way I would teach it would be, for example, I would invite people to, yeah, okay, so we're getting started, and I would explain to them, that we use these bowls, these props to support the body and in holding us in postures for an extended period of time. And we use our breath to stimulate the relaxation response, to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the
Mhm.
part of us that needs to rest. We
Mhm.
are all living in a culture where we are doing, 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 and we're out of balance, I might say. And so we
Right.
want to bring into balance this aspect of self that
Mhm.
restores. And okay, so that's the intro. So now I'll put you, let's say we start in a supported shavasana,
Mhm.
pillow under your knees, blankets, the whole nine. Then I would invite people to come into their breath. And I spend a lot of time on the breath in that first
Mhm.
pose. I might ask them to uh, follow their own normal natural breath, and then I would ask them to extend their exhale to be twice as long as their inhale. With an instruction, I would teach them how to do that. And then
Mhm.
I would remind them, I'd leave them there for a while, and then I'd say, if you haven't already gone back to your normal natural breath, do it now. And anytime you find yourself feeling agitated, just extend your exhale to be longer than your inhale. I would say
Mhm.
that. And then I would say it takes about 20 minutes for the mind to come to stillness.
Mhm.
And when the mind comes to stillness, the body relaxes. And when the body relaxes, it releases stress. And when it releases stress, that might come in the form of an involuntary jerk. It might come as an unexpected memory. It might come as an unexpected emotion. You might want to burst into laughter. You
Mhm.
might feel some anger coming up. You might feel some fear. You might feel some sadness. Then I say just receive whatever comes up. The practice is to remain still. And if you get distracted by whatever comes up, just bring it back to the breath. So that's how I introduce it. And then I start getting quiet.
Ah. Mhm.
Then I don't talk through the whole thing, because I think that this is a practice that's done in stillness and silence,
Right.
because I want them to be able to hear themselves.
Right. So you're normalizing. the experience that they're having a little bit at the
Whatever it
beginning.
is, yeah, whatever the experience you're having is yours, and
Right,
that's what makes it real. So yeah, I say those kinds of I say things like, "Just because nothing's happening, just because you're doing nothing doesn't mean nothing is happening."
right,
I
right.
say stuff like that. And then I say, "Just observe your body as it goes into deeper layers of relaxation, which is where the repair and the restoration occurs."
Yeah,
Teaching without lecturing alert
right.
awareness. I'm
Mhm,
teaching extend your breath to be longer than your exhale longer than your without you don't have to say any more than that. I'm teaching just note I say things like, and just remember, you have all the time in the world. Because I know that people get nervous and anxious and when they're being still.
they
Got
do.
her, so I say those kinds of things. I plant seeds is what I do because I'm seeding consciousness. And so I
Mhm,
think about all of that. I'm very deliberate and intentional in the words that I use. Um, so the feedback I get at the end of a class, I will always ask people. I used to make them talk,
mhm,
but they couldn't because
right.
they've gone beyond thought and language usually, and they don't. It's too hard, so I
Yeah,
stopped doing that. And
yeah.
but I do think that it's important for people to be able to articulate their experience, and so I said, just choose one word that
Mhm,
describes what you're experiencing right now. I
mhm,
always end that way, and they do. And I'm sometimes very surprised by what comes up. Usually, people will choose words like peaceful, relaxed, um, calm. Those are usually the words. And one time, a woman said, "Shame."
mhm,
I remember thinking, "Oh," I didn't react. That was my internal reaction, and I didn't say anything. And so we continued around the room. When we finished, I said, "Do you mind if I ask you? Would you be willing to say a little bit more about shame? What came up for you?" She said, "I realized in this practice all the years I had neglected my own care because I've been taking care of everyone else." She said, "And I felt so ashamed."
mm.
I thought that was so beautiful. You know what I mean? It was like,
Mm,
so when
so
you
true.
interrupt someone and try to change what they have said to you because you don't like what they said, shame. Why would you feel shame? You should
Right,
be. Then you miss an opportunity
right.
for growth. That was a growth opportunity for every single person in the room, including me.
Yeah,
I feel ashamed because of all the years I spent neglecting myself,
right.
and I will never do it again, she said. Now, who knows whether, I'm sure she went back to self-neglect as well.
Yeah,
She's a nurse. So, yeah, I'm sure she went back to taking care of everybody else,
right,
but not the same way. And that's how the transformation occurs.
right.
It's when the other thing I always say to them is I think I said this, when the mind relaxes, comes to stillness, body relaxes, then the stuff releases.
Mhm.
And once it releases, it's gone. You've now created more room and more space within. That's how it works.
That's something I think for a lot of people, that's kinda hard to even imagine
You
that
can't
it's
imagine
work.
it.
Yeah,
You have to do it. And
yeah.
that's why we say practice. So when people say, "Well, how do I teach this stuff?" You know what I say to them?
Not
Practice.
practice it.
You have to do the practice, yeah. Your
Yeah,
practice will and then, of course, there are, like if there's certain techniques that you
mhm,
can learn I teach all of that. But the best teacher is your own practice because of what comes up in you and how uncomfortable you can feel being still,
yeah,
how difficult it is to um, yeah to stay still. It took me a long time
mhm,
to feel
or
comfortable staying still. It took me a long time to even be still in the practice.
mhm,
Fidget. Um, and as you do, I found out which postures I imagined would be very, very relaxing and restful. And the relaxation and restfulness, the purpose of that is not to just be relaxed and rested. The purpose of relaxation and restfulness and calmness is it's easier to study yourself from that vantage point.
Uh,
That doesn't mean that you're not going to bump into stuff. It
yeah,
just means all the noise is gone now.
right, yeah.
Here I am face to face with me. Whoa.
Wasn't
Whoa.
expecting that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And so I think it's important to be able to just have a way to process some of those things as well. So, race based traumatic stress, I teach it, I regard it as an injury, not a disorder.
right,
And I teach it as, and the way I teach it is that whatever reaction you are having to a race related event, something external that's race related that hurt you emotionally, that's how it's defined. Whatever your reaction to that is your reaction to that.
mhm,
It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. Your
right,
reaction does not mean there's something wrong with you. There is something wrong, but it's not with you.
right,
And when
yeah,
you can begin to, again, normalize that,
mhm,
it is so empowering to people to realize, oh, thank God. Oh, you mean I'm not crazy?
yeah,
No, you're hurt.
mm, yeah, exactly,
PTSD, on the other hand, is regarded as a psychiatric disorder. There's
right,
something wrong with you.
right,
It's
yeah,
based on a life threatening event that you haven't been able to process and digest, and so keep getting thrown back into the past. So
right,
that's a very different experience than race-based traumatic stress injury. And the science, the researchers speculate because there's not a lot of research in this area. The
right,
researchers speculate that the reason Black and Brown people are diagnosed at with higher rates of PTSD is due to unacknowledged, unobserved, undealt with race-based stress and trauma.
right, yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That was part of what was in your book that I was just really fascinated with as well.
Spiritual activism.
Mm,
Um, First of all, I regard yoga as a spiritual practice.
yes,
I'll
me
start
too,
with that. And I regard us as spiritual beings.
mhm,
And so when we learn about the various aspects of being called koshas in the yoga world, you
mhm,
have a physical body, you have an energetic body that breath is kind of the conduit of our energetic body. We have mental, emotional body. We have an intuitive body, and then we have the yogis call it the bliss body, the spiritual body, the part of us that um, is bigger than we are. When all aspects of being are in alignment, we're in balance.
mhm,
And our spiritual self, the meaning making part of self, the part of us that realizes that life is bigger than me,
right,
informs the rest of us, the rest of our being. So I say it's really important for us to make friends with that part of ourselves, our spiritual self. What does that even mean? It's like, what is that? Well, you can't see, touch, taste, feel, or smell. It is beyond our five senses. It is something you have to experience. It's not something that you can describe. It's something that, but it is really what informs who we are. And so when I talk about spiritual activism, I think it's especially important now especially with young people who are very engaged now in social justice, racial justice activism. That what I teach is that if the thing is upsetting you, whatever it is, you are not in any position to be helpful at all. And so it's important for us to develop practices that support us in coming into a deeper level of, into that place of equanimity before we take action.
Right.
Because when you in psychology, what I would say in psychology terms is let the feeling pass
Mhm.
before you take action. And if you still if it still seems like a good idea to you to do whatever it is you were going to do when you
Yeah.
were in all of that feeling, go for it. But usually it doesn't.
Right.
Usually, when we can learn to sit in the discomfort of our agitation without taking an action
Mhm. Right.
and allow the action that needs to be taken
Mhm.
reveal itself to us, now we're on track. Now we can be effective. That takes a lot of practice. That takes a lot of time. It requires a level of discipline that we can all develop. We can all cultivate it, but it has to be cultivated. So for me, just the simplest way of talking about spiritual activism is, as long as you are feeling upset about it, you can't be helpful.
Right.
If you see um, um, a child having a meltdown, or if your child is having a meltdown in the store,
Right. Yeah.
and you see a mother or a father struggling with snatching the child and telling, doing all the things that might happen because the parent's embarrassed and wants the kid to behave,
Yeah.
and you decide to take matters into your own hands
Yeah, that's never a good idea.
and go, yeah, or even now, if you decide to confront somebody
Right.
really, really hard because they got too close to you and they don't have their mask on, for example,
Mm.
instead of moving,
Right.
you know, and letting yourself get calm enough to take, whatever action would elevate that's what it is. What we want to do is whatever action we take, we want to elevate the situation. We want to
Mhm.
make it better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And getting into a fight with somebody
Yeah.
about what they are doing that you don't like
Yeah.
never does that.
That's true. Yeah.
It doesn't do that. And so that's where I say, coming into that place of centeredness
Mhm.
and that place of clarity, which is the practice,
Yes.
is what supports us in receiving the wise action that we should take. Now, this may sound like, really, to people, it's like, seriously, Lily, what are you talking about? So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's why I say we have to do the practices.
Yes. Yeah.
We have to do the practices.
Yeah.
So I'll just say it in plainer terms, which I already said is, i- i- as long as you're caught up in the feelings of whatever it is that's bothering you, you cannot be helpful.
Right.
You will not. It will not be helpful. Wait until the feeling passes,
Mhm.
and
Breathe.
what to do. Breathe.
Yeah. Exactly.
Be still. And that's the practice of learning in these restorative classes, or even in shavasana, which is a restorative pose. If you can tolerate the
Mhm.
agitation that you experience while you're trying to be still,
Right.
that's the work. That's the practice. It doesn't mean that you will necessarily be still. It doesn't mean that meaning it doesn't mean that you won't feel agitation inside of you.
Right.
If I can be still in the midst of my agitation, that's the work.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Maybe you could mention the name of your book again and where they can get it, and if you have a website or how people might be able to get a hold of you if they wanna follow what you're doing.
So the name of the book is called Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. That was my working title, but the publisher liked it, and
Oh,
okay,
all right. Yeah.
all right.
It's a
Okay.
wonderful book. I
Yeah,
highly encourage people to get the book and read it.
thank
It's
you. You
wonderful.
can get it on Amazon, or you can go to my website, which would be Gail Parker, Gail Parker.com. Uh,
Okay.
order it from there. Or you can go to other, yeah, I think independent bookstores or some are carrying it. You can order it if you don't want to go through Amazon, because some people don't like to do that. So it is available. It's doing well. It's holding its own,
Oh,
and
that's fun.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
I hope people will um, enjoy it.
Mhm. Yeah, I did very much. Yeah. And, I'm very familiar with the philosophy of it, so it felt like I was kind of at home
Hmm.
when I
Hmm.
was reading it. But even if you weren't, it's so clearly written that people aren't gonna get lost in a bunch of stuff they don't get.
Jargon
People
and stuff.
will be able
No, I did. My brother told me the other day, he said, "I read your book." He said, "It was really good." He said, "It was an easy read. It was clear. It was interesting." He said, "And I can only imagine that if you were a yoga teacher or practitioner, you would really, really, really get a lot out of it." So I thought that was sweet. Yoga was the container,
right.
but what I'm teaching is applicable, like taking it off your mat, like how to live in the world, how to live in the world, with compassion and empathy and courage and self-study, um, as a tool,
Mhm.
and in community, because we can't
I
do
think
this alone.
yes, that's so true.
Cannot be
That's
done
so true.
alone.
Yeah,
No, no.
yeah.
So
Mhm. Well, thank you very much.
thank you, Lynn.
Welcome to the 2021 Radical Recovery Summit, presented by the Kiloby Center for Recovery. This is Lynn Fraser, your moderator. This year, our theme is Feel It, Heal It, a new paradigm of recovery, featuring a diverse group of thought leaders and innovators, people who are working on the ground in the new field of addiction recovery. Go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to sign up and watch free.